The blood-red sunset painted the Montana sky as Delilah Davis trudged the final steps toward her small homestead. Her body weighted with more than just physical exhaustion. 3 months since the fever had taken Thomas, and still the weight of widowhood pressed down upon her shoulders like the earth of his grave. The year was 1878, and survival in Pinecrest Valley required more strength than she possessed today, perhaps more than she would ever possess again. Delilah paused at her porch, staring at the unexpected sight before her. A tall man with broad shoulders, dusty trail clothes, and a weathered Stetson pulled low over his eyes. He sat on her porch steps, a respectful distance from her door, boots crossed at the ankles and hands resting loosely on his knees. "Madam," he said, rising slowly to his feet. His voice was deep and gentle, like distant thunder rolling across the plains. "Name's Gabriel Rhodes. I've come about the advertisement." Delilah blinked slowly, her mind foggy with grief and exhaustion. The advertisement. Of course. Thomas had placed it before he fell ill, seeking a ranch hand to help with the cattle and repairs. Work that now seemed insurmountable to her alone. She opened her mouth to speak, but found no words would come. 3 months of crying, of fighting, of trying to hold together the remnants of the life she and Thomas had built had simply drained her of speech. She looked at the stranger, this Gabriel Rhodes, and could only shake her head slightly, too weary even to turn him away. The cowboy studied her face, taking in the dark circles beneath her eyes, the loose tendrils of honey-brown hair escaping her simple bun, the set of her shoulders that spoke of bone-deep weariness. Something shifted in his expression, a softening around the eyes, a gentleness that hadn't been there before. "I understand," he said quietly. He settled back down onto the porch step. "I'll wait." Delilah frowned slightly, confused by his meaning. Gabriel looked up at her, his green eyes reflecting the dying sunlight. "I'll wait until you're ready to talk about the job. Tomorrow, next week." He paused, and something in his gaze made her breath catch. "I'll wait forever if that's what you need." The autumn wind whispered through the pines surrounding the small ranch house, and for the first time in months, Delilah felt something other than numbness. Not happiness, not hope, not yet, but perhaps the faintest stirring of curiosity about this quiet stranger who seemed to understand her silence better than most had understood her words. She nodded once, a barely perceptible movement, then walked past him into her home, closing the door softly behind her. Through the window, she watched as Gabriel Rhodes made his way to the barn, wondering if he truly meant what he'd said, and more surprisingly, wondering why it mattered to her at all. The next morning dawned crisp and clear. Delilah woke to the smell of coffee brewing, real coffee, not the chicory substitute she'd been rationing for weeks. She dressed quickly, pulling a shawl around her shoulders against the morning chill, and ventured outside. Gabriel stood by the corral, mending a section of broken fence. He'd clearly been at it for hours. Several posts had been replaced and the rails secured. His horse, a handsome dun gelding, grazed peacefully nearby. "Morning, Mrs. Davis," he said, tipping his hat but not ceasing his work. "Hope you don't mind me starting on this fence." Looked like it needed attending. Delilah approached slowly, hands clutched around her coffee mug. She nodded, grateful yet uncertain how to respond. Words seemed trapped behind the wall of grief she'd built around herself. "I made coffee," Gabriel continued, as if her silence was the most natural thing in the world. "Found some in the pantry, left it on the stove for you." He hammered another nail into place. "Your cattle need attention. About a dozen strayed into the south meadow. I'll round them up after I finish this section." Delilah watched him work, his movements efficient and purposeful. Thomas had always said you could tell a man's character by how he worked. Gabriel's hands were calloused and strong, his actions deliberate. He didn't rush, didn't waste motion. She cleared her throat, the sound startling even to her own ears after so many days of silence. Gabriel paused, waiting patiently. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice rough from disuse. He nodded, a small smile touching his lips. "You're welcome, Mrs. Davis." "Delilah," she said, the word feeling strange on her tongue. "My name is Delilah, Delilah," he repeated softly as if testing the shape of it. "Beautiful name." She turned away quickly, not ready for compliments, not ready for the warmth that flared in her chest at the sound of her name on his lips. "The cattle," she said, gesturing vaguely toward the south meadow. "Yes, madam," Gabriel replied, returning to his work. "I'll see to them directly." Delilah retreated to the house, her heart beating too fast. For 3 months, she'd moved through life like a ghost, touching nothing, feeling nothing. Now this stranger had appeared and the world seemed too loud, too bright, too present. She stood at the window, watching Gabriel finish the fence repair. His movements were graceful despite his size, and there was something comforting about his steady presence. Thomas had been frenetic energy, always moving, always planning. Gabriel seemed rooted, patient as the mountains themselves. When he mounted his horse and rode out toward the south meadow, Delilah forced herself to move. The house needed cleaning, bread needed baking, life needed living. Perhaps she could begin again, one small task at a time. By evening, Delilah had swept the floors, baked a loaf of bread, and even washed her hair. Small victories, but they felt monumental after months of barely existing. When Gabriel returned, dusty and tired from a day of mending fences and rounding up cattle, she met him on the porch with a plate of food. "It's not much," she said, offering the simple meal of beans, bread, and dried apple slices. Gabriel took the plate with a grateful smile. "It's more than enough, thank you." They sat in companionable silence as the sun set, casting long shadows across the yard. Delilah found it easier to breathe with Gabriel beside her, his presence somehow both stimulating and calming at once. "Where did you come from?" She asked finally, surprising herself with the question. Gabriel set his empty plate aside. "Originally, Tennessee, but I've been drifting since the war ended. Worked ranches in Texas, Oklahoma Territory, Wyoming." "The war," she echoed. "You fought," he nodded, a shadow crossing his face. "Confederate infantry, 17 years old and full of foolish notions about glory." He stared out at the darkening landscape, found only blood and loss instead. Delilah understood loss. She'd lost her parents to cholera when she was 16, had come west with an aunt who died 2 years later, had met and married Thomas only to lose him after 5 short years together. "Thomas, my husband, he fought too," she said quietly. "Union cavalry. Used to say the only good thing that came from that war was learning to appreciate peace." Gabriel nodded slowly. "Your husband sounds like a wise man." "He was," she replied, feeling the familiar ache of grief, but finding it somehow less overwhelming than before. "He would have liked you, I think." Gabriel turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "High praise indeed." He stood, stretching his tall frame. "If it's all right with you, I'll sleep in the barn tonight. Tomorrow we should check the north pasture fence line. Saw some damage there when I was riding back." "The cabin," Delilah said, pointing to the small structure about 50 yards from the main house. "It has a bed. It's where our ranch hands stay." She hesitated. "When we have ranch hands." "Are you hiring me then, Mrs. Davis?" There was a gentle teasing in his tone, though his eyes remained serious. Delilah considered the question. Was she? She barely knew this man, yet in one day he'd accomplished more than she had in weeks, and there was something about him, a steadiness, a quiet dignity that made her feel safe. "Yes," she decided. $20 a month plus room and board, if that's acceptable." Gabriel nodded. "More than fair." He gathered his plate and cup. "Thank you for the meal and the opportunity, Mrs. Davis. I won't let you down." As he walked toward the cabin, Delilah called after him. "Gabriel," he turned back, silhouetted against the twilight sky. "Why did you wait? Yesterday, when I couldn't speak, most men would have moved on." Gabriel was quiet for a long moment. "My mother went silent for nearly a year after my father died. I learned that sometimes the heaviest words are the ones that can't be spoken." He tipped his hat. "Good night, Delilah." As she watched him disappear into the cabin, Delilah realized she'd spoken more words that day than in the past 3 months combined. And for the first time since Thomas's death, she didn't feel quite so alone. Days slipped into weeks as autumn deepened around the ranch. Gabriel proved himself invaluable, mending fences, caring for the livestock, repairing the roof before winter set in. He was always respectful, maintaining a careful distance even as they worked side by side. Delilah found herself speaking more, at first just about ranch matters, then gradually about other things, memories of her childhood in Ohio, stories of her journey west, even occasionally mentioning Thomas. Gabriel listened attentively, sharing his own tales of life on the trail, of the places he'd seen and people he'd met in his years of wandering. One evening in late October, as they sat before the fireplace after supper, Delilah found herself studying Gabriel's profile. The firelight cast his features in warm gold, highlighting the strong line of his jaw, the slight crinkles at the corners of his eyes. At 32, he was 4 years her senior, though the war had left its mark on him, aging him beyond his years in some ways. "Why did you never settle anywhere?" she asked. "After all your wandering," Gabriel poked at the fire with an iron, sending sparks dancing up the chimney. "Never found a place that felt like home, I suppose." He glanced at her. "What about you and Thomas? Why Montana?" Delilah smiled at the memory. Thomas saw an advertisement. "Montana, the last best place. He was so excited, said we could build something here, something that would last." Her smile faded. "We had such plans." "And now?" Gabriel asked gently. She looked around the room at the home she and Thomas had built with their own hands. "Now I'm not sure. Without Thomas, everything feels unfinished." Gabriel nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Life has a way of changing our plans." "Yes," she agreed softly, "though sometimes I wonder if I'm betraying him by going on without him." Gabriel was quiet for a long moment. "My father used to say that grief is just love with nowhere to go." He looked directly at her. "Thomas wouldn't want your love to have nowhere to go, Delilah. He'd want you to keep living." Tears pricked at her eyes, the first she'd allowed herself in weeks. "How can you know that?" "Because if he loved you even half as much as—" Gabriel stopped abruptly, turning back to the fire. "As much as what?" Delilah pressed, her heart suddenly pounding. Gabriel stood, his expression unreadable in the shadowy light. "As much as you deserve to be loved," he finished quietly. "Good night, Delilah." She watched him leave, the door closing softly behind him. Something had changed between them tonight, some invisible boundary had been approached if not crossed. And though it frightened her, Delilah found herself thinking of Gabriel as she prepared for bed, wondering about the words he'd almost said and what they might mean for both of them. The first snow fell in early November, blanketing the valley in pristine white. Delilah woke to find Gabriel already clearing paths between the house, barn, and cabin. She watched from the window, admiring his strength as he shoveled through the deep snow, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. When he finished, she called him in for breakfast: hot coffee, flapjacks with the last of summer's preserved berries, and strips of salt pork fried crisp. They ate companionably, planning the day's work around the weather. "Might be a good day to mend harnesses," Gabriel suggested. "Too cold for much outside work," Delilah nodded. "I should inventory our stores too, make sure we have enough to see us through if this winter is as harsh as they're predicting." Gabriel looked up from his coffee. "Us," Delilah felt her cheeks warm. "I meant the ranch, the livestock, and—" "Well, you're here too, aren't you?" "I am," he agreed, a small smile playing at his lips. "For as long as you want me to be." The air between them seemed to thicken, filled with unspoken possibilities. Delilah busied herself with clearing the dishes, not trusting herself to respond. Later that morning, as they worked together in the barn, Gabriel repairing leather gear, while Delilah sorted through supplies, a commotion outside drew their attention. Delilah followed Gabriel to the barn door to find 3 riders approaching through the snow. "Stay here," Gabriel said, his hand moving instinctively to the revolver at his hip. "I know them," Delilah replied, recognizing the lead rider. It's Edwin Mercer from town and his sons. Edwin Mercer had been trying to buy the Davis ranch since before Thomas's death, offering increasingly large sums that Thomas had consistently refused. Since becoming a widow, Delilah had received 2 letters from Mercer, both containing offers well below the property's worth. Mrs. Davis. Mercer called as he dismounted. He was a portly man with small, shrewd eyes and an insincere smile. "Surprised to see smoke from your chimney. Thought you might have packed up and headed back east by now." "Mr. Mercer," Delilah acknowledged coolly, "what brings you out in this weather?" Mercer stomped snow from his boots, eyeing Gabriel suspiciously. "Came to check on you, of course, being neighborly." His gaze traveled over the neatly cleared paths and stacked firewood. "I see you've hired help." "This is Gabriel Rhodes," Delilah said, "my ranch foreman." Gabriel's eyebrows rose slightly at the promotion, but he nodded politely to Mercer. "Foreman, eh?" Mercer chuckled. "Bit grand for a spread this size, don't you think?" He turned back to Delilah. "Listen, Mrs. Davis, I'll be direct. Winter's coming on hard. Running a ranch alone, even with hired help, is no job for a woman. I'm prepared to offer you $3,000 for the whole property. Fair price, considering..." "Considering what?" Gabriel asked, his voice deceptively mild. Mercer's face reddened. "Considering the circumstances. A widow, remote location, harsh winter coming." He looked at Delilah. "Be sensible, Mrs. Davis. Take the money, go somewhere easier. Start fresh." Delilah felt anger rising in her chest, burning away the customary politeness she might have shown. "This is my home, Mr. Mercer. It's not for sale, not to you, not to anyone." Mercer's expression hardened. "Don't be foolish. This land adjoins mine. It makes sense for me to expand. You can't possibly manage." "Mrs. Davis has managed just fine," Gabriel interrupted, stepping forward. "And she's not alone." The 2 men stared at each other, tension crackling between them like static electricity. Mercer's sons shifted uncomfortably on their horses. "I see," Mercer said finally, his tone suggesting he saw far more than was being said. "Well, my offer stands. When you come to your senses," he looked pointedly at Delilah, "you know where to find me." After they'd ridden away, Delilah released a shaky breath. "Thank you." Gabriel turned to her, concern evident in his eyes. "Has he been bothering you?" "Letters, mostly. Thomas always said Mercer wanted our water rights more than the land itself." She hugged her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite her heavy coat. "He's right about one thing, though. Winter will be hard." Gabriel stepped closer, his presence solid and reassuring. "We'll manage together." Delilah looked up at him, at the determination in his eyes, the strength in his stance. "Together," she echoed, and for the first time the word felt like a promise rather than a practicality. As November deepened into December, life fell into a rhythm at the Davis ranch. Mornings began with Gabriel stoking fires and feeding livestock, while Delilah prepared breakfast. They would work throughout the day, Gabriel handling the heavier outdoor tasks, Delilah managing the household and helping with whatever ranch work she could. Evenings were spent before the fire, talking, reading, or sometimes just sitting in companionable silence. With each passing day, Delilah felt more of her old self returning, not the same woman she'd been before Thomas died, but someone new, someone stronger perhaps. She found herself laughing at Gabriel's dry humor, enjoying his quiet company, looking forward to their conversations. One evening, as they sat before the fire after a particularly bitter cold day, Gabriel mentioned Christmas was less than 2 weeks away. "I haven't celebrated Christmas since before Thomas died," Delilah admitted. "It didn't seem important somehow." Gabriel nodded, understanding. "My family always made much of it, even during lean times. My mother would save nuts and dried fruits all year to make special cakes." A wistful expression crossed his face. "Haven't had a proper Christmas in years myself." Delilah studied him in the firelight. "Where is your family now?" "Gone," he said simply. "Parents passed within a year of each other after the war. Sister married and moved to California. Brother killed at Shiloh." He stared into the flames. "Haven't heard from my sister in 5 years now. Delilah's heart ached for him. "So you truly have been alone all this time?" Gabriel looked up, his eyes meeting hers across the space between them. "Until now." The words hung in the air between them, laden with meaning. Delilah felt her pulse quicken, aware of how easily she could cross the room to him, how natural it would feel to close the distance that separated them. Instead, she rose and went to a small trunk in the corner. After a moment's search, she pulled out a small wooden box. "These were my mother's," she said, opening it to reveal a collection of simple Christmas ornaments, carved wooden stars, small cloth angels, pine cones dipped in wax. "Perhaps we could find a tree, have a small celebration." Gabriel's smile transformed his face, erasing years of solitude. "I'd like that very much." The next day, despite the cold, they ventured into the pine forest that edged the property. Snow crunched beneath their boots as they searched for the perfect tree, their breath forming clouds in the crisp air. "This one," Delilah called, stopping before a small, perfectly shaped pine. It stood about 5 feet tall, its branches evenly spaced and thick with needles. Gabriel examined it with exaggerated seriousness, circling it twice before nodding approval. "Fine choice, Mrs. Davis, finest tree in the forest." He knelt in the snow and began sawing at the base while Delilah watched, suddenly struck by the domesticity of the moment. How strange that this man who had been a stranger mere months ago now seemed so essential to her world. As the tree fell with a soft whump into the snow, Gabriel looked up at her, snowflakes caught in his dark hair and eyelashes. "What is it?" he asked, noticing her expression. Delilah shook her head, unable to articulate the emotions swirling within her. "Nothing, just thank you for this, for everything." Gabriel's eyes softened as he stood, brushing snow from his trousers. "No need for thanks between friends, Delilah, friends." The word both warmed and disappointed her, though she couldn't have explained why. They dragged the tree back to the house together, leaving a trail through the pristine snow. Once inside, Gabriel fashioned a stand from an old bucket filled with rocks, and they positioned the tree near the window where it would catch the afternoon light. Decorating became an occasion for stories, Delilah explaining the history of each ornament as she hung it, Gabriel sharing memories of Christmases from his childhood. When they finished, they stood back to admire their work. "It's beautiful," Delilah whispered, the simple tree somehow more perfect than any she'd ever seen. "Yes," Gabriel agreed, though when she glanced at him, she found him looking not at the tree but at her. The days leading up to Christmas were filled with small preparations. Gabriel fashioned simple gifts in the barn when he thought Delilah wasn't looking a new cutting board to replace her cracked one. A small carved horse that resembled her favorite mare. Delilah, in turn, worked on his gifts in secret, knitting him a new scarf, baking special treats and repairing a tear in his favorite shirt. Adding subtle embroidery around the mended area. On Christmas Eve, a storm blew in from the mountains, bringing howling winds and heavy snow. By evening, the world outside was a swirling white chaos, the wind rattling the windows and slipping through every crack in the cabin walls. "I should check on the livestock," Gabriel said, rising from his chair after dinner. Delilah caught his arm. "Not in this storm, it's too dangerous." "The animals are in the barn with plenty of feed," she insisted. "We secured everything this afternoon. They'll be fine until morning." Her fingers tightened on his sleeve. "Please, Gabriel, stay." Something in her voice must have conveyed her fear, for he nodded slowly and sat back down. "All right, but first light, I'm checking on them." "First light," she agreed, relief evident in her smile. As the evening progressed, the storm grew fiercer. Gabriel added more wood to the fire, building it higher against the cold that seeped into the room despite their efforts. "We're going to need more wood before morning," he observed. Looking at their dwindling supply, Delilah nodded. "There's more stacked on the back porch. I'll get it." "I'll go," Gabriel countered, already reaching for his coat. "We'll both go," Delilah decided. "It will be faster, and I don't like the idea of either of us out there alone, even for a minute." Bundled against the elements, they stepped out onto the porch. The wind nearly took their breath away, driving snow into their faces with stinging force. Working quickly, they filled their arms with logs and hurried back inside, making 3 trips before they had enough to last the night. On the final trip, a particularly violent gust caught the door, slamming it shut behind them. Gabriel tried the handle, but the wind had somehow engaged the latch. "It's locked," he shouted over the storm. Delilah's eyes widened in alarm. The cabin was 50 yards away through blinding snow, and the temperature was dropping rapidly. "The window," she called back. "The kitchen window sticks sometimes. It might not be completely latched." They fought their way around the house, the snow already up to their knees in places. The kitchen window was indeed unlocked, but frozen shut from the outside. Gabriel used a piece of firewood to break the ice seal, then pushed it up, helping Delilah climb through before following her inside. They stood in the kitchen, shivering violently, snow melting from their clothes and hair to puddle on the floor. "We need to get warm," Gabriel said through chattering teeth. "Those wet clothes, they'll only make it worse." Delilah nodded, too cold to feel embarrassed by the implication. "There are blankets in the chest, and dry clothes." They turned their backs to each other, stripping off wet outer layers as quickly as their numbed fingers would allow. Delilah changed into a flannel nightgown and thick wool socks, wrapping a quilt around her shoulders before turning back to find Gabriel in dry trousers and one of Thomas's old shirts, looking oddly vulnerable with his hair damp and tousled. "Come by the fire," she urged, leading the way into the main room where the flames had died down in their absence. Gabriel quickly rebuilt the fire while Delilah arranged blankets and quilts into a nest on the floor before it. They huddled together in the makeshift bed, propriety forgotten in the face of practical necessity. "Better?" Gabriel asked after a while, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest where she could hear the steady beat of his heart. "Yes," she murmured, feeling warmth returning to her limbs. The storm still raged outside, but here, wrapped in blankets and Gabriel's arms, Delilah felt safer than she had in months. They talked quietly as the evening wore on, sharing stories and memories, dreams and regrets. Gabriel spoke of his time in the war, of nightmares that still woke him sometimes. Delilah told him of her fears after Thomas died, how she'd contemplated selling the ranch, returning east, giving up. "What changed your mind?" Gabriel asked softly. Delilah was quiet for a moment, considering. "I'm not sure I had changed my mind, really, not until—" She hesitated. "Until," she looked up at him, her heart pounding. "Until you came, until you waited. Until you showed me I could still live, even with grief." Gabriel's expression softened, his eyes dark and intent in the firelight. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he lowered his head and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, questioning, and over almost before it began. Gabriel drew back, studying her face. "I've wanted to do that since the first moment I saw you," he confessed. "Even when I couldn't speak?" Delilah asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Especially then," he answered. "You looked so strong, even in your silence, so brave." Delilah shook her head, tears forming in her eyes. "I wasn't brave, I was terrified, lost." Gabriel cupped her face in his hand, his thumb gently brushing away a tear. "Courage isn't the absence of fear, Delilah, it's continuing on despite it." This time, it was Delilah who initiated the kiss, reaching up to pull him closer, pouring months of unacknowledged longing into the contact. Gabriel responded with equal fervor, his arms tightening around her, his body warm and solid against hers. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Gabriel rested his forehead against hers. "I should go to the cabin," he said, though he made no move to leave. "Stay," Delilah whispered. "Please, just to sleep. I don't want to be alone tonight." Gabriel nodded, settling back against the pillows they'd arranged, keeping Delilah close against his side. "Merry Christmas, Delilah," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Merry Christmas, Gabriel," she replied, her heart fuller than she'd thought possible just months before. As they drifted to sleep before the dying fire, the storm still howling outside, Delilah realized that for the first time since Thomas's death, she was looking forward to tomorrow and all the tomorrows that might follow. Christmas morning dawned clear and brilliant, the storm having spent its fury overnight. Delilah woke to find herself still nestled against Gabriel's side, his arm protectively around her shoulders. For a moment, she simply watched him sleep, admiring the way the early sunlight played across his features, softening the lines that worry and hardship had etched there. Gabriel's eyes opened slowly, focusing on her face. A smile spread across his lips. "Good morning," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "Good morning," she replied, suddenly shy in the light of day. "Merry Christmas." He reached up to touch her cheek, his expression growing serious. "Delilah, about last night," she pressed her fingers to his lips. "No regrets," she said firmly. "Not today." Relief washed over his features. "No regrets," he agreed, catching her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. They rose reluctantly from their nest of blankets, the house cold beyond the circle of the fireplace. Gabriel rekindled the fire while Delilah prepared a simple breakfast of oatmeal sweetened with the last of the honey and dried apples. After they'd eaten, Gabriel insisted on checking the livestock. The snow was deep, but he forged a path to the barn, returning an hour later with the welcome news that all the animals had weathered the storm safely. When he came back into the house, stamping snow from his boots, Delilah was waiting with a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with a bit of red yarn. "What's this?" he asked, surprise evident in his voice. "Your Christmas gift," she said, suddenly nervous. "It's not much, but—" Gabriel took the package reverently, as if he'd been handed something precious beyond measure. "I have something for you too," he said. "Wait here." He disappeared into the cold again, returning moments later with 2 parcels of his own, wrapped in scraps of cloth. They sat before the fire to exchange gifts. Gabriel opened his first, carefully untying the yarn and folding back the paper to reveal the scarf she'd knitted, dark blue with a simple pattern worked into the edges. "Delilah," he breathed, running his fingers over the soft wool. "It's beautiful." "Did you make this?" She nodded, pleased by his reaction. "And there's something else," she said, pointing to the smaller item within the package. Gabriel unwrapped it to find a small daguerreotype in a simple frame, a picture of Delilah that Thomas had insisted on having taken during a trip to Helena the previous year. "I thought you might like to have it," she said softly. "A remembrance when you move on." Gabriel looked up sharply. "Move on?" Delilah's heart beat faster at the intensity in his gaze. "I didn't mean that is, I know you won't stay forever. You said yourself you've never settled anywhere for long." Gabriel set the gifts aside carefully, then took her hands in his. "Delilah, I have no intention of leaving." "Not unless you ask me to go." Hope fluttered in her chest, fragile as a bird's wing. "But your wandering was me searching for something I couldn't name," he finished. "Until I found it here, with you." Tears pricked at Delilah's eyes. "Gabriel, open your gifts," he urged gently. "Please." With trembling fingers, Delilah unwrapped the larger package first, revealing the beautifully crafted cutting board. The wood had been sanded to silky smoothness, the edges beveled, a simple D carved into one corner. "Gabriel, it's perfect," she said, running her hands over the smooth surface. "Now the other one," he prompted, watching her face intently. The second package contained the carved horse, a remarkable likeness of her mare, Penny. But there was something else as well, a small wooden box, intricately carved with a pattern of leaves and flowers. "Open it," Gabriel whispered. Inside, nestled on a scrap of velvet, lay a ring, a simple silver band with a small pearl set into it. "It was my mother's," Gabriel said, his voice husky with emotion. "My father gave it to her when they had nothing else of value to their name. She gave it to me before she died, told me to save it for the woman who made me want to stop running." He took a deep breath. "That's you, Delilah, if you'll have me." Delilah stared at the ring, then at Gabriel's face, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "Gabriel, are you asking? I'm asking if you might consider, someday when you're ready, becoming my wife," he said, the words coming in a rush. I know it's soon. I know you're still grieving Thomas, and I would never presume to replace him in your heart, but I love you, Delilah Davis. I think I've loved you since that first day when you were too tired to speak and I promised to wait forever. Tears spilled freely down Delilah's cheeks now. Oh, Gabriel, she whispered. I'm not sure when it happened, but somewhere along the way you became essential to me. Not just for the help you provide, but for who you are. She reached out to touch his face. I care for you deeply, and I think given time that caring could easily become love, perhaps it already has. Gabriel's eyes brightened with hope. Then you'll consider it, my proposal. Delilah nodded, a smile breaking through her tears. Yes, I'll consider it, but Gabriel, I need time. Thomas has only been gone 7 months, I understand, he said quickly. I'm not asking for an immediate answer, just the hope of one someday. He picked up the ring box. Keep this. Think about it, and when you're ready, if you're ever ready, it's yours. Delilah accepted the box, closing her fingers around it tightly. Thank you for understanding. Gabriel leaned forward, pressing his lips to her forehead in a gesture of tender reverence. I meant what I said that first day, Delilah. I'll wait forever if that's what you need. As winter settled fully over Pinecrest Valley, life at the Davis Ranch continued its steady rhythm. Gabriel and Delilah worked side by side during the days, tending to the livestock, maintaining the buildings against the snow and cold, preparing for the spring that seemed impossibly distant. Their evenings were spent before the fire, talking, reading, sometimes singing old songs from their childhoods. And yes, there were kisses sweet, increasingly passionate kisses that left them both breathless and yearning, though they maintained separate sleeping quarters by unspoken agreement, both knowing that some lines once crossed could never be redrawn. In late January, a Chinook wind brought an unexpected thaw, melting much of the snow and making the trails passable for the first time in weeks. Gabriel suggested they take advantage of the weather to ride into town for supplies. Pinecrest was a small settlement, little more than a general store, a saloon, a small church, and a scattering of houses and businesses catering to the surrounding ranches. As Delilah and Gabriel rode down the muddy Main Street, they drew curious glances from the townsfolk, many of whom had assumed the widow Davis had either perished or abandoned her ranch during the harsh winter. At the general store, they were greeted warmly by George Patterson, the proprietor. Mrs. Davis, mighty glad to see you made it through that Christmas blizzard, was about to organize a party to check on you when the next storm hit. We managed just fine, Mr. Patterson, Delilah replied, aware of the curious glances directed at Gabriel. This is Gabriel Rhodes, my. She hesitated, unsure how to introduce him. Foreman, Gabriel supplied smoothly, extending his hand to Patterson. Pleasure to meet you, sir. Patterson's eyebrows rose slightly, but he shook Gabriel's hand without comment. As they selected their supplies, coffee, sugar, salt, ammunition, fabric for mending, Delilah could sense the older man's curiosity. Been meaning to ride out and check on you myself, Patterson said as he totaled their purchases. Heard Mercer's been making noise about your water rights again. Delilah frowned. What kind of noise? Patterson glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. Rumor has it he's been talking to Judge Wilson about some old claim predating your husband's purchase of the land. Nothing official filed yet, but he shrugged meaningfully. Gabriel's expression darkened. Has Mercer been asking questions about the ranch? About Mrs. Davis? Patterson nodded. Been mighty interested in whether you were still holding on out there. Seemed right disappointed when Jeb Miller mentioned seeing smoke from your chimney last week. Delilah exchanged a worried glance with Gabriel. Thank you for telling us, Mr. Patterson. Just watch yourselves, the storekeeper advised. Mercer's not one to give up easy when he wants something. As they loaded their supplies onto their horses, Gabriel's face was set in grim lines. I don't like this, Delilah. Mercer's planning something. Perhaps it's just talk, she suggested, though she shared his concern. He's been trying to get our land for years. This feels different, Gabriel insisted. When we get back, I want to look at your deed, make sure everything's in order." They were about to mount up when a voice called out from across the street. "Well, if it isn't the widow Davis and her foreman." Edwin Mercer approached, flanked by his 2 sons. All 3 men looked smug, as if sharing a private joke. "Mr. Mercer," Delilah acknowledged coolly. "Good day to you." Mercer ignored her greeting, his gaze fixed on Gabriel. "Interesting arrangement you've got out there at the Davis place, just the 2 of you, all alone through the winter." He smirked. "Mighty cozy, I'd imagine." Gabriel stepped forward, his hand dropping to his sidearm. "You're speaking to a lady, Mercer. Mind your tongue." Mercer's smirk widened. "A lady? Is that what they're calling it these days?" He looked at Delilah with mock concern. "What would your dear departed husband think, Mrs. Davis, shacking up with a drifter before his body's even cold?" Before Delilah could respond, Gabriel had Mercer by the collar, shoving him back against the hitching post. "Apologize to Mrs. Davis, now." Mercer's sons moved forward, but Delilah's voice cracked like a whip. "Stop, all of you." She approached Mercer, her head high, her eyes blazing with righteous fury. "My husband would be grateful that I found someone honorable to help maintain the ranch he loved, someone who respects his memory and the land he cherished." She looked Mercer up and down with open disdain. "Unlike some who would use a widow's grief to cheat her out of her property." A small crowd had gathered, drawn by the confrontation. Murmurs of approval followed Delilah's words. Mercer's face reddened with anger and embarrassment. "Think you're so clever, don't you? We'll see how clever you feel when I prove that land was never rightfully Thomas's to begin with." "Is that a threat, Mercer?" Gabriel asked quietly, his hand still on the man's collar. "It's a promise," Mercer spat. "That land will be mine one way or another." Gabriel released him with a slight shove. "Not while I'm around." Mercer straightened his coat, trying to salvage his dignity. "We'll see how long that lasts, Rhodes. Drifters drift. It's what they do." He glanced at Delilah. "He'll leave you high and dry, just like all the others. And when he does, my offer still stands. Though I might have to reconsider the price given your damaged reputation." Before Gabriel could react, Delilah stepped between them. "Mr. Mercer, I wouldn't sell you that land if you were the last buyer on earth and I was starving in the street." She turned to Gabriel. "Let's go home." They rode out of town in tense silence, both processing the encounter and its implications. As the valley opened before them, Gabriel finally spoke. "Delilah, about what Mercer said, he's a bully and a liar," she interrupted firmly. "I don't care what he or anyone thinks about our arrangement." Gabriel studied her profile. "You defended me back there." A small smile touched her lips. "You defended me first." They rode on for a while longer before Gabriel spoke again. "We should get married." Delilah reined her horse to a stop, staring at him in surprise. "What?" Gabriel turned his mount to face her. "I'm not proposing because of Mercer's insinuations. I already did that at Christmas, and I meant every word." His expression was earnest, his eyes intense. "But Mercer is clearly planning something. If we were married, your claim to the land would be stronger. No one could question your right to have me there." Delilah considered his words. "Is that the only reason?" "You know it isn't," Gabriel replied softly. "I love you, Delilah. I want to build a life with you, protect what you and Thomas created, make it even better." He reached across the space between their horses to take her hand. "But I won't rush you if you're not ready." Delilah looked out over the valley, at the ranch visible in the distance, the home she and Thomas had built, the land they had loved. Then she looked at Gabriel, this man who had appeared when she needed him most, who had waited patiently through her silence and her grief, who had never pushed but always supported. "Yes," she said simply. Gabriel blinked in surprise. "Yes." A smile spread across Delilah's face, the first truly carefree smile since Thomas's death. "Yes, Gabriel Rhodes, I will marry you, not because of Mercer, not because of gossip, but because I love you too." Gabriel's face transformed with joy. He quickly dismounted, then helped Delilah down from her horse. In the middle of the muddy trail, surrounded by melting snow and winter bare trees, He took her in his arms and kissed her with all the passion and tenderness he'd been holding back for months. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and laughing, Gabriel pressed his forehead to hers. "When?" he asked. "How soon can you be ready?" Delilah thought for a moment. "Next Sunday we could ask Reverend Miller after services." Gabriel nodded eagerly. "Next Sunday it is." He lifted her hand to his lips. "Mrs. Rhodes has a nice ring to it, don't you think?" Delilah laughed, her heart lighter than it had been in nearly a year. "Indeed it does, Mr. Rhodes, indeed it does." The news of Delilah Davis's engagement to her foreman spread through Pinecrest Valley like wildfire. By Sunday morning, the small church was unusually full, many attendees drawn more by curiosity than religious devotion. Delilah held her head high as she and Gabriel entered, ignoring the whispers and stares. She wore her best dress, a deep blue wool that brought out the gold in her hair, and Gabriel had traded his usual work clothes for a clean white shirt and dark trousers, his hair neatly combed and his face freshly shaved. Reverend Miller greeted them warmly, having already heard of their intention to marry. After the service, as the congregation lingered to gossip and socialize, he invited them to his small office to discuss the details. "I understand congratulations are in order," the Reverend said, gesturing for them to sit. "When were you thinking of having the ceremony?" "As soon as possible," Gabriel replied, taking Delilah's hand. "Next Sunday, if that would suit you." Reverend Miller raised his eyebrows slightly. "So soon?" "There's usually a period of announcement, banns to be read. We're aware it's unconventional," Delilah interjected. "But given the circumstances—" "Ah, yes, the circumstances." The Reverend's kind eyes studied them both. "Mrs. Davis, Delilah, forgive my directness, but are you certain this is what you want? Marriage is not a decision to be made hastily, especially so soon after losing Thomas." Delilah met his gaze steadily. "I appreciate your concern, Reverend, but my heart is quite decided. Gabriel has been a blessing in my life during its darkest hours. I love him and I wish to be his wife." The Reverend turned to Gabriel. "And you, Mr. Rhodes, your intentions are honorable, completely," Gabriel assured him. "I love Delilah. I want to protect her, support her, build a life with her." He squeezed her hand gently. "I know there will be talk. People will say it's too soon, that she hasn't properly mourned Thomas, but I'm not asking her to forget him or dishonor his memory. I'm asking for the chance to continue what he began, making her happy, helping her thrive." Reverend Miller's expression softened. "Well said, Mr. Rhodes." He looked between them, then nodded decisively. "Next Sunday it is, then, after the morning service. A simple ceremony, if that suits you both?" "Perfect," Delilah agreed, relief evident in her voice. As they left the church, they found Edwin Mercer waiting by their horses, a smug expression on his face. "Heard you set a date," he said without preamble. "Mighty quick work, Rhodes. Almost like you're afraid of something." Gabriel tensed beside her, but Delilah spoke first. "Our wedding plans are none of your concern, Mr. Mercer." Mercer's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, but they are. You see, I've been doing some research. Turns out there's an interesting clause in the territorial law regarding widows' property rights. If the widow remarries within a year of her husband's death, and the original deed isn't properly transferred." He shrugged. "Well, let's just say it could open the door to prior claims being reconsidered." Gabriel stepped forward. "What prior claim? Thomas Davis purchased that land legally. The deed is clear." "Is it?" Mercer challenged. "My lawyers have discovered some discrepancies. The original survey, for instance. And then there's the matter of water rights, which were separately deeded but not properly recorded." His smile widened. "It would be a shame if your hasty marriage resulted in the loss of everything Thomas worked for, wouldn't it, Mrs. Davis?" Delilah felt cold despite the winter sun. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Mercer withdrew a folded document from his coat. "This is a copy of a petition I'll be filing tomorrow with Judge Wilson. I thought you might like to see it first, as a courtesy." He held it out. Gabriel took it, scanning the legal language with a deepening frown. "This is nonsense," he said finally. These claims won't hold up. Perhaps not, Mercer conceded. But they'll take months to sort out in court, maybe years. Can you afford the legal fees, Mrs. Davis? The time away from your ranch to attend hearings in Helena. The possible loss of income if the court issues an injunction against your use of the disputed water source while the case is pending. He shook his head in mock sympathy. So many complications. All of which could be avoided if you simply accepted my very generous offer for the property. Delilah looked at the document, then at Mercer's satisfied expression. Anger rose within her, burning away the momentary fear. You think you can intimidate me with legal tricks and threats? My husband taught me better than that. Your husband is dead, Mercer said coldly, and soon his dream will be too. Gabriel moved so quickly that neither Delilah nor Mercer saw it coming. In an instant, he had Mercer pinned against the church wall, forearm pressed against the older man's throat. Listen carefully, Gabriel growled, his voice low and dangerous. You can file whatever papers you want. You can hire every lawyer in Montana territory. But if you ever speak to Delilah like that again, if you ever disrespect Thomas's memory in her presence, I will make you regret it in ways your fancy lawyers can't protect you from. Do we understand each other? Fear flashed in Mercer's eyes, quickly masked by defiance. Are you threatening me, Rhodes, in front of witnesses? At a church, Gabriel released him slowly, stepping back. No threat, just a promise, man to man. He turned to Delilah. Let's go home. As they rode back to the ranch, the paper Mercer had given them tucked securely in Gabriel's saddlebag, Delilah's mind raced with worry. What if he's right? What if there is some legal problem with the deed? Gabriel reached across to take her hand. Then we'll fight it, together. But first, let's see exactly what we're dealing with. Back at the ranch, they spread the deed and other papers on the kitchen table, comparing them with Mercer's petition. The legal language was dense and confusing, full of references to precedents and statutes neither of them fully understood. There, Gabriel said finally, pointing to a section of the petition. This is what he's hanging his claim on. It says the original survey incorrectly placed the eastern boundary of the property, and that the water rights to Crooked Creek were separately deeded but never properly recorded with the Territorial Land Office. Delilah frowned, trying to make sense of it. But Thomas purchased the water rights along with the land. I remember signing the papers. And there's nothing here about a prior claim by Mercer to the land itself, Gabriel added, scanning the document again. He's being deliberately vague, hoping to intimidate us. What about this part about a widow remarrying? Delilah asked, pointing to another paragraph. Gabriel read it carefully, his frown deepening. It's citing a territorial statute that says if a widow remarries within a year of her husband's death, and the property isn't explicitly transferred to her name before the remarriage, it becomes part of the new marital estate and is subject to any liens or prior claims against either party. Is that true? Delilah asked, suddenly afraid. I don't know, Gabriel admitted. But if it is, it would mean that if we marry before the deed is properly transferred to your name alone, and if there are any valid claims against the property, they could be enforced more easily. Delilah sat back, her earlier joy evaporating. So if we marry next Sunday? We might be playing right into Mercer's hands, Gabriel finished grimly. They sat in silence for a long moment, the implications sinking in. Finally, Delilah spoke, her voice steady despite her inner turmoil. Then we wait. We postpone the wedding until we can verify the deed and ensure everything is properly transferred to my name. Gabriel reached across the table to take her hand. Are you sure? I hate the idea of letting Mercer dictate our plans. He's not, Delilah said firmly. We're simply being prudent. Thomas would have wanted me to protect the ranch above all else. She squeezed his hand. We've waited this long. We can wait a little longer to do things properly. Gabriel lifted her hand to his lips. We'll need legal advice. Someone who can navigate these territorial laws and help us secure the property. Mr. Patterson mentioned a lawyer in Helena who specializes in land disputes, Delilah remembered. If the weather holds, one of us could ride to town tomorrow and send a telegram. I'll go, Gabriel offered. You should stay here in case Mercer or his sons decide to pay another visit. As night fell, they sat before the fire, plans made for the morning, but both still troubled by the day's events. Delilah leaned against Gabriel's shoulder, drawing comfort from his solid presence. I'm sorry, she said softly. This isn't how I imagined our engagement would be. Gabriel pressed a kiss to the top of her head. Nothing worth having comes easy, Delilah, and you and this ranch are worth fighting for. Delilah tilted her face up to his. I love you, Gabriel Rhodes. And I love you, Delilah Davis, he replied, capturing her lips in a tender kiss. Soon to be Delilah Rhodes, no matter what Mercer tries. As they held each other before the crackling fire, both silently vowed that nothing, not Edwin Mercer, not legal complications, not the whispers of neighbors would prevent them from building a life together on the land they both had come to love. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Gabriel rode to Helena to consult with Harrison Reed, a lawyer recommended by Mr. Patterson. Reed was a sharp-eyed man in his 50s who had helped several local ranchers with similar disputes. After reviewing their documents and Mercer's petition, Reed confirmed their fears. There was indeed a territorial statute that could potentially complicate their ownership if they married before properly settling Thomas's estate and transferring the deeds solely to Delilah's name. It's an obscure provision rarely invoked, Reed explained, but technically valid. Mercer's clever to have found it. How long will it take to transfer everything properly? Gabriel asked. Reed frowned thoughtfully. Ordinarily, a month or two. But given Mercer's petition and the coming spring thaw making travel difficult, he sighed. 3 months, possibly 4. Gabriel's heart sank. 4 more months before he could make Delilah his wife. 4 months of separate beds and careful propriety, of enduring whispers and speculation from neighbors. Is there no faster way? He pressed. Reed hesitated. There might be one option. If you were to marry elsewhere, Wyoming territory, perhaps, or even California, different laws would apply. The Montana territorial statute wouldn't be relevant. Gabriel considered this. But we'd have to leave the ranch unattended, with Mercer circling like a vulture. It's too risky, Reed agreed. No, I think your best course is patience. Let me handle the legal work. Secure the deed in Mrs. Davis's name, then proceed with your marriage plans once everything is settled. When Gabriel returned to the ranch with this news, Delilah accepted it with characteristic grace. Then we wait, she said simply. The important thing is that we're together, and the ranch is protected. February melted into March, and March gave way to April. Spring came to Pinecrest Valley, bringing new calves, greening pastures, and longer days filled with the work of planting and repair after the harsh winter. Gabriel and Delilah worked side by side from dawn till dusk, their bodies aching but their spirits high. Each evening, they would part at Delilah's door with increasingly reluctant goodnight kisses, both counting the days until Reed's legal work would be complete. In late April, a letter arrived from the lawyer, informing them that the deed transfer was proceeding well, but that Mercer had indeed filed his petition, further complicating matters. Reed advised continued patience and assured them he was doing everything possible to expedite the process. That same week, they received an unexpected visitor. Samuel Turner, one of Thomas's closest friends from his cavalry days, arrived at the ranch on a handsome black gelding, his smile wide beneath his graying mustache. "Sam," Delilah exclaimed, rushing to embrace the older man as he dismounted. "What a wonderful surprise!" Turner returned her hug warmly, then extended his hand to Gabriel. "You must be Rhodes. Heard about you in town." His handshake was firm, his assessment direct but not unfriendly. Over dinner, Turner explained his presence. "Been meaning to visit since Thomas passed, but my rheumatism keeps me close to home these days." He glanced between them. "Heard you two are planning to marry, also heard Mercer's causing trouble about it. Delilah nodded, explaining their legal predicament and the necessary delay. Turner listened thoughtfully, then leaned back in his chair. Thomas and I served together for 4 years during the war, saved each other's lives more times than I can count. He looked directly at Gabriel. What kind of man are you, Rhodes? Thomas wouldn't want just anyone taking his place. Gabriel met the older man's gaze steadily. I'm a man who loves Delilah with all my heart, who respects what she and Thomas built here and wants to help her preserve it and make it thrive. Turner studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Thomas would have liked you, he decided. Always said Delilah deserved happiness no matter what. He did? Delilah asked softly. Turner turned to her, his expression gentle. Last time I saw him, about a month before he took sick, we got to talking about life's uncertainties. He made me promise that if anything ever happened to him, I'd make sure you were taken care of. A small smile touched his lips. Seems you've managed that on your own. After dinner, while Delilah prepared coffee, Turner drew Gabriel aside. Walk with me, he suggested, leading the way outside into the cool evening air. Once they were out of earshot of the house, Turner stopped, gazing out over the ranch. Thomas Davis was the finest man I ever knew, he said quietly. Brave, honest, devoted to Delilah. I know, Gabriel replied. She speaks of him with such love, Turner nodded. As she should, but that's not why I wanted to talk to you. He turned to face Gabriel directly. I know something about Mercer's claim that might help you. Gabriel's attention sharpened. What is it? Before Thomas bought this land, it belonged to old Jim Harper. Mercer tried to buy it then too, made Harper all kinds of offers, but Jim wouldn't sell. Then Harper died, suddenly fall from a horse, they said, and the property went to auction. Turner's eyes narrowed. Mighty convenient timing. Are you suggesting Mercer had something to do with Harper's death? Gabriel asked, keeping his voice low. Turner shrugged. Can't prove anything, but I know Mercer was furious when Thomas outbid him at the auction, and I know he's been trying to get this land ever since. He placed a hand on Gabriel's shoulder. Watch your back, son, and watch Delilah's too. Mercer doesn't like losing. The warning cast a shadow over the evening, but Gabriel kept his concerns to himself, not wanting to worry Delilah unnecessarily. After Turner departed the next morning, promising to return for their wedding whenever it might be, Gabriel increased his vigilance, never going far from the house, keeping his rifle close at hand. May arrived with a riot of wildflowers and the promise of summer. The legal proceedings dragged on, with Reed sending regular updates that amounted to little progress. Mercer had hired a lawyer from back east, a man skilled in finding procedural delays and technical objections. One morning, as Gabriel and Delilah were repairing a section of fence along the property's eastern boundary, the very section Mercer claimed was incorrectly surveyed, they spotted dust rising from the trail, indicating approaching riders. Gabriel instinctively moved closer to Delilah, his hand dropping to the revolver at his hip. As the riders came into view, he relaxed slightly. It was Reverend Miller, accompanied by a young man Gabriel didn't recognize. Mrs. Davis, Mr. Rhodes, the Reverend called as they approached. Beautiful day for a ride, isn't it? Delilah smiled in greeting. Indeed it is, Reverend. What brings you out this way? Miller dismounted, helping his companion down as well. This is Jeremy Wilkins, newly arrived from Boston. He's studying law and has taken a position as clerk with Judge Wilson while he prepares for the territorial bar examination. The young man stepped forward, extending his hand. He was perhaps 25, with intelligent eyes and an earnest manner. Pleased to meet you both. The Reverend has told me about your situation with Mr. Mercer. Gabriel shook the offered hand, curious but cautious. Has he now? Reverend Miller smiled reassuringly. I thought Jeremy might be able to help. He's been organizing the court's archives, including the original land surveys and deeds for the valley. Wilkins nodded eagerly. I've come across some documents that might interest you. The original Harper claim, including the water rights that Mr. Mercer is disputing. Gabriel and Delilah exchanged hopeful glances. "Would you care to come up to the house?" Delilah offered. "We can talk more comfortably there." Over coffee at the kitchen table, Wilkins spread out several maps and documents. "Here's the original survey from 1862, he explained, pointing to a yellowed map. "And here's the deed transferring the property from Harper's estate to Thomas Davis in 1872. Gabriel leaned closer, studying the boundaries. "According to this, the eastern border follows Crooked Creek for its entire length, then cuts due north at the fork." "Exactly," Wilkins confirmed. "And here's the separate water rights deed properly recorded with the Territorial Land Office in 1873. He produced another document, this one bearing an official seal. "It grants Thomas Davis exclusive rights to Crooked Creek and its tributaries for irrigation and livestock." Delilah's eyes widened. "So Mercer's claim about improper recording is false," Wilkins finished. "As is his assertion about the survey being incorrect. I've compared the original survey with the most recent one conducted last year. They match precisely." Hope surged through Gabriel. "Do Judge Wilson and Mr. Reed know about these documents?" Wilkins shook his head. "Not yet. I only discovered them yesterday, filed in the wrong section of the archives. I brought them directly to Reverend Miller, knowing he was acquainted with you." "This could change everything," Delilah said, excitement coloring her voice. "If Mercer's claims are demonstrably false, then his entire petition could be dismissed," Gabriel finished, "and we could proceed with our wedding plans." Reverend Miller smiled benevolently. "God works in mysterious ways, doesn't he? Young Jeremy here was assigned to organize those archives just last week." Wilkins carefully refolded the documents. "I'll need to take these back to file properly, but I've made copies for your lawyer." He handed Gabriel a thick envelope. "I'd suggest sending these to Mr. Reed immediately." As they thanked Wilkins and the Reverend profusely and saw them off, Gabriel felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. Perhaps their long wait was finally coming to an end. The following week brought the news they'd been hoping for. Reed arrived in person, his normally serious face breaking into a satisfied smile as he dismounted in their yard. "It's done," he announced without preamble. "Judge Wilson has dismissed Mercer's petition entirely." Those documents young Wilkins found were the key proof that Mercer's claims were not just weak, but deliberately misleading. Delilah clasped her hands together in delight. "And the deed transfer," Reed patted his saddlebag, "completed and recorded. The ranch is now solely in your name, Mrs. Davis, free and clear of any encumbrances or disputed claims." He withdrew a leather folder and handed it to her. "All the paperwork is in order. You are now the legal owner of the Davis Ranch and all its appurtenances, including the contested water rights." Gabriel wrapped an arm around Delilah's shoulders, joy surging through him. "Thank you, Mr. Reed. Your services have been invaluable." Reed's smile faded slightly. "I should warn you Mercer didn't take the dismissal well, made some threats in the judge's chambers that were concerning. You should remain vigilant." Gabriel nodded, sobering. "We will. But for now, we have a wedding to plan." After Reed departed, promising to return for the ceremony, Gabriel turned to Delilah, taking both her hands in his. "Well, Mrs. Davis, it seems there's nothing standing in our way now. When shall we set the date?" Delilah's eyes sparkled with happiness. "How does next Sunday sound, Mr. Rhodes?" Gabriel laughed, lifting her off her feet in a joyful embrace. "Not a moment too soon," he declared, sealing the agreement with a kiss that promised many more to come. Word spread quickly through Pinecrest Valley that the Davis-Rhodes wedding was back on. Delilah was touched by the outpouring of support from neighbors she hadn't realized were watching over her. Women arrived bearing food, offers of help with preparations, even a beautiful handmade quilt as a wedding gift. Men stopped by with freshly butchered game for the wedding feast, bottles of good whiskey, and thinly veiled warnings to Gabriel about treating the widow Davis right. Through it all, Gabriel remained steady and good-humored, winning over even the most protective of Thomas's old friends with his obvious devotion to Delilah, and his respectful mentions of her late husband's legacy. 3 days before the wedding, as Gabriel was repairing the porch steps determined that Delilah should have a perfect home to return to after their brief honeymoon in Helena, he spotted riders approaching from the direction of Mercer's property. Setting down his hammer, he called to Delilah inside, then positioned himself at the front of the house, one hand resting casually near his revolver. As the riders drew closer, Gabriel recognized Edwin Mercer and his 2 sons, along with 2 men he didn't know, rough-looking fellows with the hard eyes of hired guns. "Afternoon, Mercer," Gabriel called, his tone neutral but his stance alert. "What brings you to the Davis ranch?" Mercer reined in his horse, studying Gabriel with undisguised contempt. "Just passing by, thought I'd offer my congratulations on your upcoming nuptials." His smile was cold. "And on your unexpected legal victory." Gabriel remained silent, watching the other men carefully. The 2 strangers had positioned themselves slightly apart from the Mercers, their hands resting too casually near their weapons. "Nothing to say, Rhodes," Mercer prodded. "No gracious thanks for my good wishes, thank you," Gabriel replied evenly. "Is there something else you wanted?" Mercer's false smile faded. "Just to give you a friendly warning, life's full of unexpected turns. Today's victory can become tomorrow's defeat with surprising speed." "Is that a threat?" Gabriel asked, his voice hardening. "A philosophical observation," Mercer countered. "This valley's a dangerous place. Accidents happen, fires start, cattle disappear." He looked past Gabriel to where Delilah now stood in the doorway. "Beautiful bride you've chosen, Rhodes. Be a shame if anything happened to spoil your happiness." Gabriel took a step forward, anger rising. "You've said your piece, Mercer. Now get off this property." Mercer chuckled, turning his horse. "No need for hostility, we're just being neighborly." He nodded to his companions. "Come on, boys, let's leave the happy couple to their preparations." As they rode away, Delilah came to stand beside Gabriel, her face pale but determined. "He won't give up, will he?" Gabriel put his arm around her shoulders. "No, but neither will we." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "I think we should have someone stay at the ranch during our honeymoon." "I don't trust Mercer not to try something while we're away." Delilah nodded agreement. "I'll ask Sam Turner, he offered before." That evening, as they sat on the newly repaired porch steps watching the sunset paint the valley in shades of gold and purple, Gabriel found himself thinking of the long journey that had brought him to this place, to this woman. "What are you thinking about?" Delilah asked, noticing his contemplative expression. Gabriel smiled, taking her hand in his. "About how close I came to riding past your ranch that day. I almost didn't stop, you know." "Why did you?" she asked curiously. "Something in your advertisement caught my eye. It mentioned wanting someone who values peace and quiet, after years of drifting, of always being a stranger wherever I went." He squeezed her hand. "Those words called to something in me, made me hope I might find what I'd been looking for without even knowing I was searching." Delilah leaned her head against his shoulder. "And did you find what you were looking for?" Gabriel turned to her, lifting her chin gently with his finger. "I found more than I ever dreamed possible," he said softly. "I found home, Delilah, I found you." Their wedding day dawned clear and perfect, the kind of spring morning that seemed created especially for beginnings. Delilah dressed in a new gown of soft blue silk, a fabric she'd been saving for years for a special occasion. Mrs. Patterson helped her arrange her hair, weaving in sprigs of wildflowers picked fresh that morning, in the small church, filled to capacity with what seemed like the entire population of Pinecrest Valley. Gabriel waited nervously at the altar. He wore a new suit purchased in Helena, his usually unruly hair neatly combed, his face clean-shaven. Samuel Turner stood beside him as best man, offering quiet words of encouragement. When Delilah appeared at the church door, a collective murmur of appreciation rose from the gathering. Gabriel felt his breath catch at the sight of her radiant, beautiful, walking toward him with purpose and love shining in her eyes. As she reached him, taking his hands in hers, Gabriel found himself thinking of that first day, her silence, his promise to wait forever. How far they had come since then. Reverend Miller's ceremony was simple but moving. When he pronounced them husband and wife, Gabriel gently lifted Delilah's face to his and kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to the eyes of even the most stoic ranchers present. The celebration afterward at the the Rhodes ranch lasted well into the evening. Neighbors had prepared a feast, musicians played lively tunes, and even the children of the valley participated, presenting the couple with handmade gifts and shy congratulations. As twilight fell, lanterns were lit around the yard, casting a warm glow over the continuing festivities. Gabriel found a moment alone with his new wife, drawing her away from the crowd to the quiet corner of the porch. "Happy, Mrs. Rhodes?" he asked, his arms around her waist. Delilah's smile was radiant. "More than I ever thought possible again," she admitted, reaching up to touch his face. "Thank you for waiting for me, Gabriel, for understanding my silence, my grief, my fears." "I would have waited forever," he reminded her, pressing a kiss to her palm. "But I'm mighty glad I didn't have to," she laughed, the sound like music to his ears. "So am I, so am I." Later that night, after the guests had departed and they were finally, blissfully alone, Gabriel carried his bride across the threshold of their home. In the soft glow of the bedroom lamp, they came together as husband and wife, their passion tempered by tenderness, their love expressed in whispered words and gentle touches. And as they lay entwined afterward, Delilah's head resting on his chest, Gabriel silently renewed the promise he'd made that first day to cherish her, to protect her, to wait for her if ever she needed time or silence again. Not just for a season or a year, but forever. 2 years later, the Rhodes Ranch was thriving. Under Gabriel's careful management and Delilah's wise counsel, they had expanded their herd, improved their pastures, and even added in addition to the house a nursery for their 6-month-old daughter, Emma, whose arrival had brought a new dimension of joy to their lives. Edwin Mercer had eventually sold his property and moved back east, defeated by the combined forces of legal justice and community solidarity. The people of Pinecrest Valley had chosen sides, and they had chosen the Rhodes family, boycotting Mercer's businesses, and making it clear that his underhanded tactics were not welcome in their community. On a warm summer evening, as Delilah nursed Emma on the porch swing and Gabriel finished his day's work in the barn, she reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. The grief that had once rendered her speechless now seemed a distant memory, though she still kept Thomas's picture on the mantel and spoke of him to Emma, wanting their daughter to know of the good man who had first built their home. Gabriel joined them on the porch, freshly washed from his day's labor, his face lighting up at the sight of his wife and daughter. He sat beside them, one arm around Delilah's shoulders, the other hand gently stroking Emma's downy head. "I was thinking," he said after a comfortable silence, "about expanding the north pasture next spring. The new irrigation system is working well and we could support another 50 head easily." Delilah smiled, recognizing his careful approach to what was really on his mind. "And," she prompted. Gabriel grinned, caught in his roundabout way. "And I was thinking that maybe Emma might like a brother or sister to grow up with. Not right away," he added hastily, "but perhaps in a year or so." Delilah laughed, leaning into his embrace. "I think that's a wonderful idea." Both the pasture and the sibling. They sat together as the sun set over their land, their family complete yet with room to grow, their love deeper for having been tested by grief and uncertainty, stronger for having overcome obstacles both personal and external. And in the quietness of the evening, with his wife in his arms and his daughter drifting to sleep against her breast, Gabriel Rhodes knew with absolute certainty that his long years of wandering had led him exactly where he was meant to be, to this land, to this woman who had once been too tired to speak, to whom he had promised to wait forever, and for whom forever would never be long enough.